There is a battle happening right now over who gets to control your intelligence. On one hand, you have companies like Nvidia who are in favor of open-weight AI models. And then on the other hand, you have companies like Anthropic who aren't saying exactly that they want to ban open-weight AI models, but they seem to be hinting at a lot of restrictions around them. Now, open source models, open weight models have been around for a very, very long time. In fact, OpenAI started off as an open AI lab. That's why they call OpenAI. Their first two models, GPT-1 and GPT-2, were completely free and open source. You could download the weights, you could download the model, you could run it on your own if you had the hardware to run it. GPT-3 was the first time they put it behind their own servers and locked it and gave it to you on a paid API. And that led to a plethora of other companies doing something very similar. Google got into the game, Anthropic got into the game, and many others. So you had all of these companies building these really powerful AI models and charging people to use it through the API. And of course, they got a ton of investment. OpenAI became a unicorn overnight. So did Anthropic. Google obviously always was. And then every other company, Cohere from Canada, there are a few others that were building these closed models and charging companies to use them through an API and got a ton of funding to continue to do that. And that led to a cycle of these companies building better and better models. The more they were able to sell their models and more funding they got, the more they were able to improve upon it, collect that data and feedback from existing usage, and then build better and better models. To the point that now you have models like Mythos from Claude, Anthropic, that is supposedly close to AGI, artificial general intelligence. And I've tested out some of these, the frontier models, and they're exceptionally good. If you think about the progress AI has made from 2020, when I first started to use these models, GPT-3, and I built my own startup on top of it, to today's models of Fable 5, GPT Soul, the increase is dramatic. It is a exponential curve. It's growing like this, right? And it's just getting better and better. And open source models have always been there as well through this whole journey, but they don't have the same advantages that these closed companies did because they're not charging for those models, right? So they don't charge, they don't get investment. So a lot of the work or the models are not as good as the frontier model. They don't have the best engineers to build it. They don't have the best technology and access to the hardware and the funding to train it and all of that. And training a model, delivering a model, it takes millions and millions of dollars. It is exceptionally capital intensive to do so. So open models have always been lagging behind. And so this debate has never come up because closed models and closed model companies like OpenAI and Anthropic have been sitting on a very good lead for a long time, and they're pretty happy with that lead, and they make a ton of money, and they're just getting more and more investment and more money every day. But that changed this month. That changed because Chinese AI models, which have been catching up, and we've noticed this for over the last couple of years, they've started to catch up. Until today, they actually did catch up to the frontier models. Just a couple of weeks ago, Moonshot AI, one of the Chinese AI labs, announced Kimi K3, the latest and greatest version of the Kimi series of AI models, completely open source. In fact, they released all of the weights for the model just a couple of days ago. So you can go as a business, download it, set it up on your GPUs, run it, and you have an AI model running for you on your own servers with your own data, fully secure, all of that, right? And you don't have to go and pay Anthropic or OpenAI and so on. So the capabilities of open source have been catching up to Anthropic and OpenAI and the closed source frontier models, to the point that they're running a bit scared. So when Kimi K3 came out, Dean Ball, who is the head of strategy at OpenAI and used to work in the US government, wrote this post. And he gave his opinion on Kimi about how it's such a good model and all of that stuff. And then at some point, he started to talk about how it is not good or healthy for AI in the US. So he started to draw a direct comparison with open-weight models actually being decelerationist. And that is a term that the people in tech use, accelerationist, decelerationist, to describe, who wants technology to accelerate and improve versus who wants it to decelerate and not improve, right? So what Dean was saying is, if you have these open weight models that are as good as the frontier closed source models, then what incentive do people have or companies have to continue to pay OpenAI and so on for their models when they can just go and get their own model and host it on their own and run it on their own? And in fact, that is what a lot of companies are doing today. Even though some of these open source models have in the past not been as good as the frontier models, for a lot of the work that you do at companies, and we at Refound, we work with many of these businesses, a lot of the work that is automated right now with AI or is being automated with AI is stuff like email automation and updating a CRM and creating a proposal or whatever. Like it doesn't need the latest and greatest and the smartest models. It just needs models that are good enough. And a lot of the open weight models are good enough. By the way, I'm interchanging open source and open weight. There is a distinction between the two, but for all intents and purposes, for this video, let's call it the same thing. But I mean open weight models here, where you can, don't necessarily have the full source code for everything and all the training data, but you could just get direct access to that model and host it on your own. So what's been happening in the most recent months and last couple of years is, as these open weight models, many of them coming from China, have gotten better and better, many companies are realizing that they don't quite need the biggest and best models from Anthropic and OpenAI, and they're starting to use some of these open weight models, which tend to be smaller and less powerful, but cheaper to run on their own for tasks that don't require the most intelligence. And so Dean's argument here in this post is, hey, well, now if they're catching up to the frontier models, then the reason for ever going to a frontier model are vanishing, right? And if everyone starts to use more open weight models, or a bulk of companies start to use that, then OpenAI is going to lose revenue or not make enough, and their growth is going to slow, and investors are going to stop investing. And that is bad, because if the investment stops, then OpenAI cannot continue to develop bigger and better models. And so he calls that deceleration, is saying that is going to impact OpenAI's growth. And if there's no more investment in OpenAI and other American companies like Anthropic, then AI research stops. And they hand the lead to China. So if you look at this again, he goes on to draw that line from open weight models being bad to China using it as a destabilization strategy for American AI. So what he says is like, well, if who's funding this? How is it sustainable to keep producing better and better open weight models? Because even the models coming out of China cost a lot of money to train, right? Now, there's obviously been some speculation and some evidence that these Chinese models are using the American models to distill and to train their own models, so they get to do it for a bit cheaper. And they don't have access to the same amount of hardware and GPUs, so they've done a lot of optimization to build these models, but it is still costing them a lot of money. And so he argues that the Chinese government is funding that as a way to destabilize American AI. And then he goes on to say that the government of the United States should not necessarily ban open source, but just tell everyone that it is bad and scare them into not using it. That is what FUD is: fear and uncertainty and disorder. Cause fear, uncertainty, and disorder in the American economy and in the American populace about Chinese models, and tell a story that it is bad so that they just don't use it, and you don't have to outright ban it, because there's no way to ban something that's open weight. Because if it's on the internet, it's on the internet. You can't take it down. Someone's copied it. It's shared a million times. It's out there, right? And so Dean is arguing that open weight models bad for American businesses or American AI. The government should do something about it. And of course, Dean, being a very influential person in the US government, you can only imagine that he's already had these conversations with the government, which is what this whole debate is about, because the government is now also starting to make moves. The government is considering a ban or some sort of restriction on open weight models. And that is bad. That is bad because we have already seen last month the US government decide to suspend access to Fable 5 and Mythos 5, which are the best models in the world. So they directed Anthropic to shut off access. And Anthropic did so right in the middle of the day while companies were using their API to build their products and run their businesses. Boom, access gone. And that kind of highlights the problem with closed source AI. Like, it is great. Like, they've built amazing models. Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, they've built incredible models. They've done the world a whole lot of good. But all of that, all that power is concentrated between these 2 to 3 companies. And if the government or one of these companies decides to shut down access, or who can access one of the models and who can't, then you are at their mercy. You don't have the option because your entire business is running on this one API. And if it gets cut off, you're shit out of luck. That is why open weights and models are so important, because it gives you that flexibility. So let's go back to that letter that Nvidia just sent out. This is what Jensen Huang and the Nvidia team put out just a few days ago. And it talks about the importance of open weights in American AI leadership. It draws a line or a parallel from open source software and how open source powers so much of our world and our software, which is true, and how open source has helped all software, which is also true. And they make the same argument that open weights can do the same thing for AI, because open weights, gives you a lot more flexibility and options, which, as we saw, if the government can step in and cut access, or any like Anthropic or OpenAI decides to cut access, then you as a business need to have other options, and open weights gives you those options. It also then leads to more investment in the overall AI tech stack, because AI is not just about training a model, but there's a whole bunch of hardware and infrastructure and data centers and all of that goes into it. There's a massive supply chain. And so, yes, OpenAI and Anthropic are worried, and it's a real worry that if businesses don't choose their models and they go to open weight models, their business is going to be in trouble. But there's hundreds of other businesses in this supply chain that benefit from more models being around, Nvidia included, because they sell chips. So yes, obviously there's a bit of an incentive for Nvidia to put this and throw their weight behind open weights, pun not intended. But there are a number of other businesses that have done so. Andreessen Horowitz, the famous VC, Box, Dell, IBM, Hugging Face, Meta, Microsoft, and even more. At the time of this recording, there are a few more companies, including OpenAI. But there's one company that is conspicuously absent from this list. I'll give you a second to think about which one that might be. That's right. If you guessed Anthropic, it is Anthropic. Anthropic's CEO Dario wrote a post a couple of days after that NVIDIA letter answering why they haven't supported that letter. And so they say, hey, no, look, we have never advocated for a ban on open weight models. And they say that open weight models that don't have dangerous capabilities are a public good. But here's the thing. They're adding a clause. They're saying that the ones that don't have dangerous capabilities are a public good. But the story they're now trying to tell is that the ones from China do have dangerous capabilities. So they are not a public good. So that's the thing. So you're saying, Anthropic is saying, hey, look, we're not against open source or open weight models. We're just against the bad ones. But they're hinting at all open weight models being bad open weight models. That's the problem here, right? So they are trying to say that they're not against it, but the truth is they're trying to also say that they are against it, right? Like the fact is they are against it. They're just trying to hide it by saying we're only against the bad ones. This is powerful technology. I understand. For sure, if it gets into the wrong hands, it is bad. I understand that. And the stance here that they're taking on the surface seems right? powerful AI models may be misused to carry out cyber attacks and so on. And they're saying, oh, it doesn't matter where they come from, China or anywhere else. It does matter. You can read between the lines. Obviously, it does matter. But let's assume that they are right? So it doesn't matter where they come from. But if it's powerful, they may be misused. So again, they're just drawing a direct comparison from open-weight models to being, if they are powerful, may be misused. Ergo, they have dangerous capabilities. Ergo, they are not a public good. So that's basically the direct line they're making here. And what they are saying is someone needs to be the arbiter of who decides what is good and what is not good before these models can be put out into the open. And obviously, they're positioning themselves. Which brings us to the newest letter in the debate. So here's the latest one from them called Pacing the Frontier, and they've gone ahead and tried to get more signatures on their side, and that's where the debate is. We have Nvidia's open-weights and AI leadership paper, and then Anthropic's Pacing the Frontier, right? And here they talk about how AI is great, but AI could also have risks, and therefore we should develop security measures and strengthen oversight. And so they are requesting that the US government step in and give that oversight and regulation. And now again, we've already seen the US government step in and just completely cut off access to a model. So you're handing over power to a handful of US companies with the backing of the US government to create this new gatekeeping of deciding which model is good and which is bad, which models pass their guardrails, the ones that they set, their security measures, and which ones don't. So they get to decide which ones pass, which ones don't. And guess what? They're probably going to say their models pass and all the open weight models don't, or all the competitor models don't, right? And that's how they're trying to bring about the ban on open weight models while saying that they are not against open weight models. So you see the story that's being painted here, the lines that are being drawn, and the battle that is happening. Open weight on one side and the proponents of open weight, even though that they obviously, like Nvidia, have some skin in the game there and they have a monetary incentive. And then on the other hand, the close primarily is Anthropic, but you also do have some folks from OpenAI and a few other AI companies. You have Meta, you have Google, and so on. So some folks from some of these closed companies, you'll notice they're mostly closed except for Meta, who are advocating for a lot more regulation and a concentration of power with these companies. So that is everything that's happening right now with this debate. And I think it's important that we have open weights as an option, because it is scary to think that the best models, the most powerful intelligence is going to be put behind gates, behind companies that determine who gets access to it and who doesn't, or governments that determine who gets access to it and who doesn't, and companies that determine what is good and what is bad. If you try Fable, you'll notice that it refuses to answer certain types of questions. Obviously, it's fine if an AI does not answer how do you murder someone, but if you're asking questions about biology or how to train AI, and Fable famously does deny someone's request because it's afraid that it's close enough to biochemical terrorism or whatever, then you're basically at the mercy of what they've decided is good or not good, right? And at the end of the day, they become the arbiters of intelligence. They become the watchmen. And the famous question is, who watches the watchmen? Anyway, if you like what I said, or if you understood what is going on from this video, I would appreciate a comment. I would love to hear your thoughts. It doesn't matter which side you're on. I'm very clearly on the open weight side. But like I said, I do see what the closed side is saying and some of the concerns. But I think for the greater good, I think open weight is much better. And I'd love to hear you. I'm happy to debate. Give me your thoughts, critiques, whatever. Comment below. Let me know. Thanks for watching.